Here's what the Prime Minister had to say about the news that has surely placed his party in a pretty poor position.
This will enable Parliament to confirm that with our new treaty, Rwanda is safe. It will ensure that people cannot further delay flights by bringing systemic challenges in our domestic courts and stop our policy being repeatedly blocked. I told Parliament earlier today that I'm prepared to change our laws and revisit those international relationships to remove the obstacles in our way. So let me tell everybody now, I will not allow a foreign court to block these flights.
Yeah, we don't need to allow foreign courts to block the flights because they've just been blocked by a British court. So, so much for that idea. But, you know, this is a complete and utter mess, a complete and utter omni-shambles, it would be called, if we were in the thick of it. In fact, it would be something probably an awful lot worse. But even we can't say that. But Madeline Grant's still with us from The Telegraph. We're also now joined by Conservative peer Lord Daniel Moylan. Good evening and welcome to the greatest show on earth, is what we call it here. This is all a bit of a mess, isn't it? I mean, it doesn't sound as though Rishi Sunak even is convinced himself by what he's saying, that they're going to change the law, they're going to bring in some emergency legislation. It's all going to be about making sure that nobody can interfere any longer in British sovereignty. But he doesn't really mean it, does he? Because he can't do any of that.
It's going to be very, very difficult. And part of the problem, just with the emergency legislation, probably arises in the House of Lords, where I sit, because there are... I don't know what the emergency legislation says, because nobody's seen it, but one can imagine there are bits of it that the House of Lords would simply vote down. Of course, in the end, the Commons can impose its will on the House of Lords, but if you follow the full Monty for doing that through the Parliaments Act, it takes about a year and a half as a minimum.
Yeah.
Well, he hasn't got a year and a half to force the legislation through. So the House of Lords and the sort of all the lefties in the House of Lords, my colleagues, dear colleagues...
David Cameron.
David Cameron...
I put it with the lefties.
A straight bat for the government, David Cameron, great man.
He's not a lefty.
He's not a lefty.
No.
But there are a lot of lefties in the House of Lords, and they are in a very strong position to prevent emergency legislation going through, given the timetable. That's one thing. The other thing is, we haven't seen the treaty.
Yeah.
So we don't know. Does it deal with the issue, the principal issue was this refoulement issue, or whether they're going to be sent back to their original country.
Yeah.
Does it deal with that? We don't know. Will it deal with it to the satisfaction of the Supreme Court? Well, it's taken the Supreme Court 3 or 4 months, and they took August off, obviously they always do, 3 or 4 months to hear what the Court of Appeal had to say. The Court of Appeal took several months to hear what the, So even to get a decision on that, you're looking at a timetable that runs close to a general election. So what have you got to say to the public?
Yeah, well, nothing really. That's the problem, Madeline, isn't it? I mean, and we were saying earlier that Suella Braverman probably didn't want to be in government on this particular day, so she engineered it so that she wasn't, and she finally got her wish, I guess you could say, because she started a couple of weeks ago kind of agitating and trying to say things that might get her fired. I don't know if that's what her plan was, but it looks like that, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think she's got her eye on the big job, and she's thinking ahead to the next Conservative leadership election. Although I do think that, that as the saying goes, that he who wields the knife doesn't always wear the crown, and I think that there is some truth to that, because, in essentially coming out like this and acknowledging, for example, that there was a secret deal with Rishi Sunak in order to get, who knows what the reality is, but, I think once you've come out with all of this very private stuff, you have essentially shown that you're quite untrustworthy in a future cabinet or shadow cabinet. So I'm not sure that she's necessarily endeared herself to many of her colleagues in doing this, and in such a very public and combative way.
Well, she's threatening Lord Moylan to issue yet more information, more dossiers on why the government has failed in this area. She says that she offered... Rishi Sunak came out and basically said, well, if you were going to do all this stuff, why didn't you just do it? She says that she was offering to do things and he was ignoring her. So who's telling the truth here? What are you hearing?
Well, I don't have any particular access to the truth. I will just say that, a politician who can, over a short period of 2 weeks, engineer her own dismissal on exactly the grounds that allow her to write exactly that letter, on exactly the day before the day on which she'd want to be dismissed, probably deserves to be Prime Minister, because he must be an absolute genius to put all of that together. The idea this has all been carefully calibrated and choreographed by a sort of spider figure at the centre of it all, Suella Braverman, I don't believe that. I think what it also does, focusing on that, takes away from basically her message, which you're touching on now, which is that her argument is that if you were going to do this, it was going to be really hard. Yeah. It was going to be really, really hard. And you had to change lots of legislation, and you had to force through really difficult clauses, and you had to take political risks about it, and you had to be willing to annoy people whose regard you stand in.
Yeah.
People who, upset people who you don't want to upset. And her argument is that she was pushing the Prime Minister to do that, and he wasn't. Now, the truth of it, of course, we don't know. Both sides need a fair hearing. But that's her argument, and that's quite a powerful argument, I think. And it does need answering.
Well, it does, because, I mean, the Tories have been in power for 13 years. I speak to people in the immigration business who remember when Blair was in government, and there was a much easier way and a much better method of deporting people in those days. They used to have a hearing, a court basically at Heathrow, where they would put people straight into, and they would have a hearing within a day of arriving in the country, and if they weren't qualified to stay, they were kicked out. Simple as that. And there were 50, 60,000 people a year, Madeline, back then, who were being deported. And now it's down to a few hundred.
Yeah, and who's been in charge of the Home Office for the last year? Suella Braverman. You know, this is my issue.
Yeah, but it's not just her,
though,
is it?
of course it's not just her, but this is my issue, because the problem isn't one of intention and desires. I'm sure, you know, a majority of people in the British public want this all to work out. The problem for the Conservatives is one of delivery, and Suella Braverman has not visibly delivered any of the things that she now complains about, and people can see that. All this achieved, I mean, I agree that there are serious questions that need to be answered here. It's particularly dangerous for the government because it feeds into perceptions that are already very prevalent about the weakness and indecision and so forth. And Rishi Sunak needs to answer them. But you can't really argue that Suella Braverman has exactly been on top of these things that she complains about.
Well, I remember when she came in after Priti Patel left, and she was said to be the person who would get it right because she had been a lawyer in the Home Office and she knew all the tricks of the trade and she knew all the back routes that could be negotiated with various different people. It now appears that the Home Office is sort of on the other side. Apparently, according to a piece, I don't know if you saw it in the Telegraph today, from an unnamed official, it looks, and we kind of know this from the way that the pronounization of the civil service, where they're more interested in what you sign off your emails in than you are actually doing government policy. There's sort of the enemy within. You've got the Treasury people who are all saying, let's make sure we have plenty of migration because we need low-income workers for the economy. We've got the Home Office saying we don't want to carry out evil Tory policies and kick people out. Maybe there's nobody that can fix this.
There's a real issue about about the apparatus of the state and how responsive it is to elected governments that, at least Conservative elected governments, people trying to do things that they're not accustomed to. And it's probably too big an issue for this show, but there's another, just this segment now, but there's another issue, which is we forget the way over which the last 25 years, and it goes back to Blair and Brown and as well, and it's not an excuse for the Conservatives, how much power and decision-making has moved from departments like the Home Office into number 10.
Right.
So actually almost nothing happens and is agreed without somebody at number 10 signing it off. And number 10 is an inefficient, it's not designed for that level of power.
Right.
So it's in this halfway house, a presidential system of government supported by a bunch of teenagers, most of them, who are a bit older than that.
Not much, though.
But not much, not much. You compare that to the sort of apparatus the US president, another executive, presidential style, or Macron, the quality of the people Macron has in his cabinet when he leaves. When they leave, they might go and become an ambassador somewhere, run a company, something like that. And we have it all handed largely to people who've struggled to get an internship at a start-up government.
And they seem to come and go with incredible regularity. They're not there very long either.
Well, that's sometimes a good thing.
Well, maybe. But there is something wrong with the way that this government today... I mean, I think today the government has been revealed as being not really in charge of the country. I don't think they're doing what the people want them to do. They seem to be in the throes of kind of just giving up, effectively. And there was nothing I saw from Rishi Sunak's statement this afternoon, Madeline, that gave me any hope that he's going to do anything between now and the next election for anyone.
I know. Well, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, and it's sometimes very difficult to get your head around the legalistics because it is so complicated. But I can't help but thinking that if there was some kind of easy lever that you could pull that would solve this, then surely it would have been pulled by now.
Right. How about shutting down the Supreme Court, like I suggested earlier? I mean, people talk about the Supreme Court as though it's some kind of great, ancient tradition. It's not. It used to be that we had the Masters of the Rolls. It used to be the House of Lords. It was the highest court in the land. And that sort of switched over to Europe. There's no reason why the Supreme Court has to continue to exist, is there?
I think there is a reason why you'd want a final court of appeal. I think what's, again, more interesting is the fact that we've shifted the lawyers, what's called the jurisprudence, the philosophy of law, over the last 30 or 40 years has shifted very strongly away from the idea that the best assurance of our liberties in this country was democracy, over to a view that the best assurance of our liberties is a set of rights and legalisms which can override democracy. And are set against
challenges
democracy.
effectively.
And all of this has happened without anyone having a debate about it publicly that the public have participated in. So you have people running around saying it's the rule of law, as if that was some sort of sacred doctrine. It's very much an invention of the last 30 or 40 years. And it doesn't fit well with our traditional legal system.
And the Supreme Court, in and of itself, is a very American type even name. You know, they've got their Supreme Court where they elect people onto it. You know, maybe we'll end up doing that. But part of the problem here, it seems to me, Madeline, is they have made a political decision today. They've made an opinion. They have not given us any facts. You know, as the guy said when he was making his statement, you know, it could be dangerous if you're from Rwanda to stay here because somebody might send somebody to kill you. The United Nations has sent refugees to Rwanda. Israel has sent refugees to Rwanda. You know, Libya has sent refugees to Rwanda. It's clearly a place where refugees have been going. So the fact that our Supreme Court suddenly says, oh, no, it's a dangerous place, it's too dangerous, doesn't make any sense.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, and I think that Lord Moylan made a good point about having that final court of appeal. But I think ultimately, you know, there has to be a way in which Parliament and what comes out of the Commons and those judgments can take precedence.
Yeah, it must do, sure.
Well, that will be tested, won't it?
Yeah, otherwise we
might as well all give up.
That will be
tested in the coming weeks.
Yeah, I think so.